Hey everyone, I hope you all had a safe and happy holiday season and a fantastic New Year's celebration. I'd like to start this year in this video off by first saying thank you to all of my subscribers who support my channel and the content that I create. I know I've not had a very consistent schedule the last couple months, and I apologize for that. Going forward and beginning next week, expect to see at least 2 videos weekly from me on Tuesdays and Fridays. I try to pride myself on the fact that I do this right and attain all proper permissions to narrate the stories I read and focus on quality over quantity, so thank you all for bearing with me. This is something I would love to dedicate my time to and eventually do full time. However, until my channel grows majorly in popularity, I must also do my 9-to-5 grind, as well as dedicate a good chunk of my time to my son, which limits the time I can currently dedicate here. This video will also be a 2-parter consisting of some very good real stories submitted by one of my subscribers, Aaron England, about an entity that resembles what his folks call raven mockers. They have occurred throughout the span of 12 years from when he was 10 to his current age now of 22. Thank you, Aaron, for allowing me to share your stories with everyone. Now, let's begin. This first one happened at my grandmother's house. At the time, my aunt lived up around Black Mountain and would come down ever so often with her 2 kids. The family would all get together at Grandma's house and eat. They would stay a few days. All the younger kids would end up spending the night so we could hang out since we didn't see them much. Anyway, this particular night, everyone else was passed out in the house, and Tristan and I decided to go outside after everyone had fallen asleep. We were out at the shed joking around and smoking cigarettes. It was very quiet at the time, but we hadn't paid it much attention. I heard my grandmother call my name, and we freaked out and scrambled to hide the evidence, thinking we were busted. Oddly, her voice seemed to be coming from around the side of the barn, as opposed to it coming from the direction of the house. My cousin had never really dealt with anything like this before, so we got curious. I'm a native. I grew up hearing old stories and knew you didn't mess with stuff like that. That said, cousin was a show-off and liked to look tough, so I caved, and we went to look. We walked up toward the tree line, and out of nowhere, one of my other cousins started calling me, from ahead of us in a thick patch of cane, on the swampy side of the woods. That particular cousin, Dakota, was in the house passed out on the couch at the time. Then my dad called me, followed shortly by my aunt, both of whom had gone home hours before this. The thing had literally mimicked a nice percentage of my family at this point, so I'm creeping up to that patch of cane, and I stop about 5 feet away from the tree line. There's a tree just beside these bushes, and about 15 feet up, there's a branch. That branch starts shaking, and I hear the leaves rustle. When I looked up, I saw something falling from that branch. It almost looked like a large bird, but I didn't really get a good look at it. It was moving too fast. It was a transparent, glowing whitish, yellowish color, and it faded as it fell. It vanished completely just before it reached the tops of the cane. As soon as it landed, it sounded like something started running at us head-on through those bushes. If I had not experienced the events that happened up until this point, I'd have thought a bear was charging toward us. It's the only logical answer. If you looked across the top of the cane, you could see the taller ones parting. This thing was big, fast, bipedal, and really heavy. It looked like it was going to make one hell of an entrance, with the sound to match. I can only describe it as sounding like a man that weighed as much as a small horse running at a full sprint. Or more like a horse that was running on 2 legs. I don't use that one much. Most people laugh when I describe it as a 2-legged horse. Anyway, right before it got to the edge, it just stopped. We were too shook up to even move. We just stood there. When I finally regained mobility, I walked backwards all the way to the house. I didn't take my eyes off that tree line once. We got inside, and as soon as we closed the door, something hit it. Tristan opened it up to look, and there was nothing there, so he closed it and locked it. We turned and started to walk away, and it happened again. It hit harder this time. We looked at each other and went straight to the living room. We sat there in the darkness and did not move or say a word until the sun came up. This second story happened at my house in my backyard. My buddy Fernando was staying over this particular night. Me and Fernando had set up a tent, and we were planning on staying outside that night. We were in the house getting something to drink, and I started to head back outside while Fernando was still playing around in the fridge. So we had this really weird cat at the time that just showed up out of nowhere. It would just show up and creep around the edge of the woods and just watch me all the time. Sometimes he would glare at me all night while literally peeking out from around a tree. All you would see was a cat-shaped black outline with two eyes that glowed a bluish-green color when the light hit them. It was unnerving. Occasionally, it would make these really unusual sounds that were kind of cat-like and not very cat-like at the same time. Almost like the cat was mixing a completely different animal sound in with his cat noises. It only did the weird noises at night. We had a lot of cats that hung around, but they didn't make the noises like this. The other cats even seemed to be a little weirded out by him sometimes. They would avoid him, and some even left entirely after he started showing up. Anyway, this particular night, I walked out the back door and he was sitting in the middle of my backyard, glaring at me as usual. So I took off in a full sprint and chased him out of the yard, past this line of tall bushes that blocks out all of the porch light. He ran into the woods, and I don't recall ever seeing him again after that. I turned and started to walk back, and immediately it felt like some kind of heavy wind just blew through me, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a cougar. This thing sounded pissed, and it couldn't have been more than 5 feet behind me. I made the good 30-yard dash to the back door in about 2 seconds. Fernando was on his way out at this time, and had seen the whole event from the window and the back door. Fernando pushed the door open and I ran inside. His eyes were damn near big enough to use for dinner plates. Mine probably weren't much smaller. He said something along the lines of, "Did you see that?" And I replied with, "No, but I heard it." He said there was an older looking man with glowing red eyes standing behind me and that he had tried to grab me. We just left the tent where it was and decided to sleep in the house that night. I started referring to him as Cat God after that. When I tell this story today, I always make a joke about how we gave him the yard that night. I always follow up by saying, he could have had the house too, if he came in here to claim it. At the time, I was under the impression that it was some demon that really liked cats and just happened to live in my backyard. I didn't bother the cats after that, even the scary ones. Later, I came to the conclusion that the cat was some kind of shapeshifter and that it turned into the red-eyed man that mocked the cougar. Or the other way around. One of those. This next story also happened in my backyard, but at the other end of the line of tall bushes that cuts through it. My dog was hooked up to a tree that stood maybe 20 feet in front of this old barn behind our house. This old barn is where we store the tractor. It's pretty much just an unfinished shack. It has 3 rooms and only one has walls, mostly just plywood. The other 2 are pretty much just a tin roof and some 2x4s that hold it up. This barn is on the other side of those bushes where the porch light stops. So anyway, I'm pacing back and forth, lengthwise of the dog runner, and talking to the creator, occasionally stopping to pet my dog. I know, weird, but that's how I pray. I pace a lot at night during the summer, especially in the few days leading up to, during, and after the full moon. My neighbors probably think I'm a werewolf. Anyway, I'm doing my normal pacing ritual, and I start to get this really weird feeling like I'm being watched. I'm very sensitive to energy and things, so I almost immediately locked on to the general direction of where I thought it was coming from. And my dog made it clear that it wasn't just my imagination when she perked up and started staring in the same direction. She started alternating between deep growls and a deep hushed bark. The hair down her back was standing straight up. Now remember, that line of bushes blocks out all of the porch light, and in the summer, the trees back there are so thick that even the brightest full moon light won't light up that tree line. Plus, the tin roof blocked out any light that did get past the trees, so it was near pitch black under that shelter. I made the mistake of saying, "I know you're there, show yourself," because I'm a dumbass. That made everything get about 1,000 times worse. Instantly, this invisible thing starts attacking us. Me mostly. The dog starts pulling away, whimpering, and trying to yank her head out of her collar. My entire body tenses up from the almost electrical energy in the air. A horrible smell that I can only describe as death starts floating around. I felt paralyzed and really sick to my stomach, and it only seemed to get worse. Whatever it was, it just seemed to be focusing, I don't know, intent at me, I guess. Some horror terrifiable kind of intent. I started getting these short bursts of horrifying visual images. My chest started to feel like someone had set my insides on fire and started digging around inside me with a fork. I couldn't even run. Eventually, I blacked out or went into some kind of trance or something. When I came out of it, I was just standing there, still staring at that spot. It was still there, but it was just watching. I guess it felt like it had made its point. My entire body was sore and I felt nauseous. I unhooked the dog and walked to the back door with my head nearly twisted backwards, trying to make sure nothing snuck up on me. That night, I went to sleep and didn't get out of my bed for nearly 2 whole days. I was sick as a dog, and it felt like I had been poisoned. It took almost a week to recover fully. After that, you couldn't pay me to go near those woods at night. Hell, I wouldn't even go back there in broad daylight for months afterward.